Hello everyone. In this module, we are going to be learning about distributed system. So firstly, we'll just quickly discuss how we perform the communication between applications in the SOA. So when you talk about SOA there, if we have some application and if you want to communicate, if you want both of them to communicate with each other, we are going to be using a lot of services. We are going to be having some set of services and they are going to be having that interaction over the network. Okay. So when you talk about SOA, every application is going to be considered as a service. And we are actually going to be having two types of services which is involved in the communication. So the first one which we will have here is going to be your service requester. You can also call it as data requester. And the other one is going to be the service provider. Or you can say data provider. So that is how it is going to be there. Now, when you talk about service requester, so this is going to be making a request for the data. So it will make a request for the data and the service provider is going to reply back with the requested data. So that is how it is going to be there. And all of these things is actually going to happen across a network, right? So that is how it is going to be there. So whenever these services are going to interact, the primarily function is to transfer the data between them. And this data transfer can be in two ways. We can have it in unidirection or we can have bidirectional. Now, what do you mean by unidirectional? This means you are going to be transferring your data in one way. And when you talk about bidirectional, here you are going to be having two-way data transfer. So like I'll just quickly take one of the example of each so that you can understand what I am actually meaning by that. Now, let us say you are you are one service and there is another service S2. If you want to send some notification, so that is what you can do in one direction only because you are only sending a notification. You are not actually involving any reply there. But if you talk about bidirectional, like let us say we have two services and let us say some cricket is happening, some cricket match is happening. So what S1 will do? So this one is going to be checking the score. And what will happen? The S2 is going to reply back with the score. Because generally if you have seen if any match or anything happens, so generally on the phone and all people will be just keeping an eye on the scores. So here if you would have understood what we are doing, we are performing a two-way interaction because in this case your S1 is requesting the information from S2, S2 is processing the request and it is sending the data back to S1. So this interaction is essentially the core how your SOA is going to be interacting with each other. So if you talk about today's world, here data is everything, correct? So if you talk about your mobile phone, if you talk about your laptop, if you talk about any software application, everywhere your data is going to get involved. And what these applications are basically doing, so these are processing some data in forms of some crunching and munching. So they are taking the data, modifying it, and then providing you the reply there. So that is how it is happening. So when you talk about the software oriented architecture, so if you will see that we are actually performing transfer of data only. So in this one, what is happening? We are performing transfer of data only, correct? Because this one requested for the score, requested for some data, this one replied with the data. So if you will see what actually happened overall, some transfer of data only. So this is how the communication is happening here, correct? This SOA, like, when you talk about SOA, so this is actually built up upon transfer of data only. So when we will be having some communication between the application, that is going to be some sending and receiving of data on the internet. So when S1, is requesting some data from S2, and when S2 is sending it back to the S1, so there what is happening? There is some data transfer. That is what is happening here. So when two services, if they are communicating with each other, if they want to communicate with each other, if they want to talk to each other, they are going to be using some set of protocols. Those are going to be involved so that they can send some data back and forth. But what were the main challenges? That was in figuring out how services are going to be built with different technology and they can still communicate. So one solution for such a problem was RPC. So what RPC is, that is your remote procedure call. So, what was exactly happening here? So in this one, we are providing you a way so that you can go ahead and run your code on different servers. So even if server is far away, but still you will be able to run your code there. But there is a downside of RPC as well. That is, both of the services need to be built using the same technology. For example, if you are having some service, let us say SA, if that is built using Java, and if you are having another service SB, so that also has to be built with Java in order to make them work on RPC. That is what is the one of the setback about it, the downside about it. In order to solve the problem of services not being able to communicate across different technologies, SOA introduced SOAP. What is SOAP? SOAP stands for your simple object access protocol. So, in order to solve the problem of services not able to communicate with each other, we came up with SOAP, and SOAP was a game changer. SOAP was a big improvement because it allowed communication between services written in different technology. It kind of acted like a translator between the application. So, what exactly happened? Let me take some real life example. Like, let us say this is you, and let us say you're traveling to Japan. It doesn't matter that you know Japanese or not. You can still have the option of either you can hire a person who can act like a translator so that whatever you want to tell to this guy, you will first tell this to him and he will tell it to this guy. Otherwise, you can make use of translator app. So you are going to be writing it here and showing it back to this guy. So that is how the translation is going to be acting. So similar way when you talk about SOAP, so that is also acting like a translator between application, and that is also making it possible for different applications to communicate with each other even if it is written in different programming languages. So even if you talk about the same, this translator example in the world of programming, so there also if you will see what SOAP is doing, SOAP is acting like a translator. So let us say we have our service A which is written in Java. If you have a service B which is written in .NET, what is happening here? We are using SOAP, and with the help of SOAP we are exchanging data. And how that is happening? We are converting our data into a common format which both of these services can actually understand. So generally, in order to perform that, we are going to be using some language like XML. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. When you talk about XML, so that is technology neutral. It means that it can be read. It can be understood by different programming languages. So SOAP is going to be using XAML to make sure that services, if we are having services which are written in the different languages, still they are able to communicate with each other. Still they're able to understand with each other. Now we will see how SOAP is actually going to be working. Although I said that if we have two services and if they both are using different languages, still they be able to communicate. So what is going to be the step one here? So here, if S1 is sending a SOAP request, like, since I want to communicate, so what will happen? The SA is going to send a SOAP request. Okay, and now how the request is actually going to be there. So this is going to be there in the form of XML document. Correct. Now what will happen? This request is going to get received by S2. So SB is going to be receiving the request. And how they are going to request it? They are going to be receiving it in the form of XML document. So if you will see in both of the cases, we are using a, uh, sorry. S2 is going to receive a SOAP request, which is there in the form of XML, correct? Now what S2 will actually have to do, S2 is going to be sending a response back, okay? And when it is going to be sending a response back, it is again going to be using XML document for the same. So if you will see what is exactly happening, if we are having some services SA, SB, if SA is sending a request for something, if some request is going, so it is going in the form of some XML document. After that, if a request got received here, if it wants to send a response back, to send the response back again, we are going to be making use of XML document. So what these services are basically doing, they are receiving the XML document. All right, and after that, what they are doing on that, they are performing some processing, so that after the processing we are going to be getting the data which we were initially looking for. So that is how it is going to be working here. So when you talk about SOAP, so what SOAP is doing, it is simplifying the complexity of making different applications interact. It is handling the technical details so that developers do not have to worry about the differences in the system. Like, you do not have to manually send a request in XAML. The SOAP is taking care of that. So SOAP is enabling a seamless communication between the services, regardless of the programming language, the technology in which they are going to be built. SOAP provides a standard way for the services to exchange messages using XAML, making it possible for the systems to communicate across different platforms and technology. So if you talk about any communication, we are going to be using some networking protocol. Okay. So when we are going to be using this networking protocol, like why are we going to use it? So that we can establish a connection between the services. And what are the common networking protocols which we will be using? One is TCP, where it stands for Transmission Control Protocol. The other one which we have is your HTTP. So this HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The other one which we have is your UDP. UDP stands for your User Datagram Protocol. So when you talk about all of these protocols, so these ones are going to be operating on the network layer. So where these ones are going to operate on the network layer. Okay. And these ones are going to be ensuring that your data is transferred over the network. However, the actual communication between the applications such as SOAP messages or other data formats are going to occur at the application layer. So when you talk about the protocols like your TCP, HTTP, UDP, so these all are your networking protocols. And at the end of the day, when we are performing some communication, then first of all, we will be needing a protocol to establish that communication, to enable the applications to interact with each other. And at the end of the day, we are going to be needing something which we call as networking protocols. So, however, networking protocols work at the lower levels, dealing with how data is transmitted over the network, that is the network layer. So, what we are discussing here is how two applications communicate with each other at higher level, how the two applications are going to be communicating with each other at application layer. So, when SOAP was first introduced, it was a big breakthrough. People were very excited. They were very happy that with the help of SOAP, it got all possible for us to make different applications written in different programming languages communicate, because there we were just only using XML and that was working fine. So at first it worked well, but over the period of time, people began to notice some problems with. So they started complaining, just how when we meet a new person, initially we are not going to see any of the issue in them, and we are going to like them for each and everything. So similarly, like when any product is launched or when any technology is launched, so people are only going to see what problems they are solving, how they are good, but eventually they will start complaining about them as well. We will start noticing, like in the human, we start noticing some shortcomings. Similarly, with the technology and the gadgets, we also start seeing some shortcomings and we start complaining about it. So when you talk about soap, so soap was very heavy, soap was very complex, heavy, soap was very complex, soap was very slow. Why it was all of that? Like I said, in SOAP, we are going to be using XML. So if you know, in XML, we create our own tags based upon the requirement. So what you will do, you are going to be creating like just taking some dummy variables. So like let us say you want to send uh, some message. So then you will be selecting something like to sender. You will provide some information, then closing tag. Then from, then again you are going to be putting some data, then some value, here it will be there some date and time, you are going to be putting date and time. So if you will see, in order to process some simple information, this is the information, and if you will see, we are adding some starting tags and some closing tags. And this is actually going to make our class go heavy, because here we are having a lot of opening and closing tags. So that's how you can understand why I'm saying it is heavy, because we are actually going to be adding a lot of unnecessary information. Similarly, I'm going to make it complex. Why complex? Here, if you will see, for every opening tag, I have a corresponding closing tag. And if I am going to be skipping one of the closing tag, in that case, it is not going to work correctly. So I'm adding the complexity, because these things are not even going to give you any error. If you are going to build, it is going to build successfully. Last one is slow. So since it is heavy, if you are sending like, if you talk about some heavy data, so if you are sending that out, it is eventually going to become slow over the internet, right? Why I'm taking this reference? So like, let's talk about some old times. So previously we had RAM of somewhere around 256 GB. MB, sorry. Like, talking about extremely old times. So that much RAM we were having, and that time it used to be fast. But if you will look at today, so even if you are having some 16 GB, like, in my laptop, I actually have 64 GB. If you talk how much transition this has happened, previously we had it in MB, still that was working so much fine for us, but now it is becoming slow for us. Similarly, if you talk about mobile phones, so previously they all were coming with certain amount of MBs. I even remember I bought one phone which actually had 128 MB only as the storage. But if you now look at today, I have 256 GB phone, and that also looks like lesser in storage, because these days the data is evolving. We have a lot of things to keep in our phone. Yeah, so when the data started growing, even the phones with lesser storage started causing problems. So similarly, like when you talk about soap, so like why I actually took this example, so that like we can relate it with soap. So initially when soap was introduced, so at that particular time, although it was using multiple languages, still like people were happy using it because initially it was quite fast. And that was because less number of peoples were using it. When more people started using it, of course, we were also transmitting more data, and that particular time we started seeing that it is slow. Now better I'll represent fast with less users, and this turned slow with more users. So that was the thing why soap actually became slow. So people started complaining that soap is slow. At the same time, like we say soap is slow. At the same time, it was complex. And why it was complex? That was because we were involving XML there, your extensible markup language. So in this one, like this is your uh, this is actually going to be involving a lot of your tags. So if you are not going to be ensuring that you are having correct opening and closing tags, in that case you will be facing some of the issues. So that is why your XML is actually complex, because like if you are missing one of the tag, the whole XML is going to lose its meaning. At the same time, since I said we are going to be dealing with a lot of tags, so that is going to be eventually making your soap heavy, because we are actually having a lot of data. Like it will be having, like here we have discussed, it will be having less data which we want to transfer, but it will be having a lot of tags which are also getting transmitted for no reason. So because your soap is so much dependent upon XML, because it has its entire dependency on XML, so that is why soap became slowly it became unpopular, because like here what we are using XML. And when we talk about XML, here we are going to be having a lot of tags. And also when we talk about XML, so XML is your language neutral tag. Like by what do we actually mean by that? If we talk about any other languages, C sharp, Python, Java, so there we are going to be following a specific syntax. And like even if like let us say you are writing some string like this, or if you're writing with S capital, so they both are going to be having a different meaning. And like if you talk about list, so generally we define it like this, but even if you will write it like this, so this is going to throw error, because like here we are going to be dealing with a lot of tags, and we want it in that specific manner only. So that is why we say XML is your language neutral. And when we talk about language neutral, one thing also which we add there, that is it will be easy for anyone to read and understand. Here we are going to be using XML so that we can read and process our data. So initially when SOAP was introduced, it relied on XML so that you can have communication. And like when you talk about this communication, so here we are going to be having different applications, and all of those applications are going to be interacting with each other with the help of XAML. So even say like let us say you have some of your application one, and that application is built in Java. Let us say you have your another application, let us say application 2, and let us say it is built in Python. Let us say you have your application 3, and let us say this is built in C sharp. So if you will see, all of these applications are different. Still, if we want to provide a communication, how we will do? With the help of XAML. So XAML is going to be providing communication between the applications. And if you talk about interoperability, so SOAP also allows that, because what is the core concept behind that? That no matter in which language your application is going to be written, we should be still providing the support across different languages. So even if we have one of your application which is going to be written in Java, and if you will have your another application which is written in, let us say, C sharp. So even though the languages are different, but still they both can interact with each other over the network. And how it will and how all of that will happen? This application is going to be using your XML file, and this application is also going to be using your XML file. And this is going to just like be able to process and transfer the data. So that is how it is going to be there. Like, whenever we will be having any two applications, just like this, application 1 and application 2, and if they want to communicate in SOAP, like if we are making use of SOAP system, so at that particular time, when we will be having communication, that is going to be involving several steps. Like, I'll also be telling you what and all steps are going to be there, and we are going to be making use of all of those steps if they are going to be using XML as the format for data exchange. And here we are going to be using XML only for the data exchange. So what and all are going to be the steps? Let me just mention it here. So firstly, we are going to be creating and sending data. Now, what is the actual meaning of this? This means, like, if you must have heard of a word, serialization. So basically what we are going to do, we are going to be like, basically like, if we are going to be having some of the data, before sending it across, we need to create and send it in a format which the other application can understand. If, like, let's take this example only. If we are having two application and if they both are in different languages, and if your application 1 wants to communicate to the application 2, if application 1 wants to send some data to the application 2, so first application 1 is going to create that data, and it is going to be converting it into XML format. Now when you talk about XML, so XML is easy for different programming languages to understand, like Java, Python, and many other languages, correct? However, when you talk about XML, so XML is a text-based format, and computers usually send data in binaries, zeros and ones. Like everybody knows about that, right? So here, if I'm saying I am going to be making use of XML, which is making use of which is going to be making use of your text-based format. So what is going to happen? So before sending the data, application 1 is going to change XML into a binary format. So if this is your application, and if this application wants to send some data, how it will do? It is going to be making use of XML. And what is XML? This is going to be using some text-based format. Now, your system is going to be understanding the zeros and ones. So in order to perform that, like in order to convert into zeros and one, we are going to be making use of binary format. And this entire process is actually called as serialization, because what we are doing, we are converting our data, like, what we are actually doing. So here we are converting an object or your data into a byte stream, so that, like, whenever you will be having some network, it can easily be transmitted over a network, or if you want, you can also store it on a disk. So when application is serializing that XAML, it is converting it into a format that can be transferred across the network. Like here, if you see, your application is actually converting that data into a binary byte string. And later on, what will happen, like in this one, this application 1 is actually making, like, they are actually making use of XML, and we are converting it into a byte stream. And later on, these byte streams are sent over the network to your application 2. So what will happen? This is your application 1. Here we are writing it in XML. This is your application 2. This is also going to be using XML, right? So XML is going to be used for transferring your data. Now what will happen? since like we said, we are going to be like, when you are going to be providing that communication, so your hardware is going to be using the network, and that network is going to be using your data which is written in some binary. Yeah, so when your application 1 wants to send some data to your application 2, we are going to be sending it over network, and that network is actually going to be making use of your binary stream. Here we are going to be making use of some binary language, and that binary language is going to be written in the zeros and ones. Now, in order to perform this operation, we are going to be using, like, we are going to be converting this one into a byte stream and this also into a byte stream. So this is your step one where we are performing serialization. Okay. Now the next step is like, here your application 1 was actually sending it to your application 2. So these were the steps which your application 1 performed. Now, like, let's say your application 2 has now received it. So after receiving, what is going to be the step which we will perform here? So the next step is receiving and reading the data. And this is what we call it as deserialization. So here what is going to happen, like I said, we are going to be having like, let me just take example. So like, let's say we are talking about application 2 and let us say this is written in C#. So now this one is going to be receiving byte stream from application 1. Correct. Now, like, although we are sending it in the form of zeros and ones, but this application can only understand C#, right? So what will happen before performing anything? This one is actually going to get deserialized. And why that is important? So that this application can understand. So deserialization is opposite of your serialization. What it will be doing, it is going to be converting, like, we are going to be having some byte stream. So it is going to be converting your byte stream into human readable format. Correct? Or some usable format. So in this case, we are going to be converting it. I'll write properly. Convert back to XML because that is the format which we are using here. So once the data in once we have the data in the XML format, in that case application 2 can read and understand the XML data which was sent to it, right? So even though your application 1 is written in Java and let us say your application 2 is written in C#, but they both can understand the XML data format, and that is only possible because they are performing all that operation in the XML, and when they are performing it out at that particular time, they are making use of the important steps which are serialization and deserialization. In order to convert your data into binary streams, you are going to be making use of serialization, and in order to convert your data from like, from byte streams to your readable data XML format, you are going to be performing a step which is called as deserialization. Now once your application 2 has received a request, now what is the next step which your application 2 needs to do? That is sending a response. So here, after processing the data, application 2 may need to send a response back to your application 1. So it is going to be following the similar process. Your application 2 is going to be like, whatever the response data is there. So firstly, we are going to be converting it into XML so that we can send it over. We are going to be serializing your XML data into the binary format, because you cannot straight away understand, right? So it is going to be involving your serialization, which is going to be converting your byte stream, and then that byte stream is going to get sent over the network to your application 1. Now what application 1 will do, your application 1 is going to receive the response. Now, upon receiving the response, that is going to be there in the form of your byte stream. So we are going to deserialize it back to XML. We are going to process it and we are going to be taking the necessary action. So that is how basically we are going to be these are the 4 steps which we are going to be using here. I hope it must be clear to you. So what we do, in order to make two applications communicate, we are going to be making use of SOAP. For SOAP, we are going to be converting your data, whatever we want to send, in XML, and then we are going to be converting it to the byte stream. Upon receiving, that byte stream is going to get converted back to XML, and accordingly, we can decide if we want to send a response or not based upon the request. All right, I hope this must be clear to everyone. Now we are going to be discussing what are the problems which we were facing with. So also whenever any problems we are going to be encountering, we are going to be making another uh, technology to come into the picture. So we can say let's discuss problems with SOAP. First, we'll see what problems we had here, and later on we will see how we actually came up with another technology which was helping us here. Okay. So initially, SOAP was widely used. Like whenever we had to perform any communication between two different applications, at that particular time, we were using SOAP. However, over the time, it started facing several problems that made it less practical. And why? Because people started saying that SOAP is slow. They started saying SOAP is complex. They started saying SOAP is heavy. So with more users, we started facing all of these issues. And because of this, we thought that, okay, what else can come and help us here? So that was the REST, representational state transfer. That is more simple and more flexible. Okay. But before going to your REST, let's discuss all of these things in little more detail. So when you talk about your SOAP, so we say this is heavy and complex. And why it is heavy and complex? That is because of the XML which we are using here. Like I said, if you want to send some data, so how you are going to be sending, like let us say you want to send some data, we have a person John whose age is 30. We have a user here. So even if you will see, this is a small piece of data which we want to send, but still we are going to be wrapping it across a lot of tags. And what will actually happen? That is going to make the entire message size large. So let us say we want to represent it. So how we will do? We will do it something like this: user. Then we will do name. Then John. After that, let us say age. So 30. Age. And user. So you will see, just to provide this much of information, now we are actually going to be sending this huge data, correct? So this XML has a lot of extra tags, which makes it more difficult to read and process. Now, what is the solution for this? So for this one, JSON came into the picture. So when you talk about JSON, so if you want to send such a data, how you can do? You can probably just send it like name, whatever name you are going to be having, like John. And if you want to send age, you can just do age and provide the value. So when you talk about JSON, here, whatever data we want to pass, like both sides, left side, right side, both we are going to be putting in the double quotes. So instead of sending this huge data, now you can see we are just sending it in this simpler form. So this one is easy to read, this one is actually shorter, and this one is very simple to work with. I hope this must be clear, right? Now the next disadvantage is heavy metadata. So, when you talk about XML, like I said, when you are going to be talking about XML, so there we are going to be having a lot of metadatas. What are metadata? So here, if you will see, like, in order to send a user information, we are making use of tags, these tags, these tags, these tags. Even if, like, let us say you want to read it word by word. So if you will see, we actually wanted to send a information of 2 words. Instead, how many words we are actually sending? Like, on a very like layman language, I'm saying. So these are called as your metadata. So instead of like, if you will just see, we are passing very less actual information and a lot of metadata. So in such a case, like, if you will be seeing, like, if we are going to have a lot of data, so in that case, again, possibly, like, here we can say the ratio is something like 1 is to 5, something like that. So eventually, like, let us say we are going to be sending some information of 100 words. Instead, we are going to be sending 500. So if you will see here, the difference is actually going to be actually explaining you how bigger data we are going to be sending. So that much, a lot of metadata we are going to be sending there. So, like, when you talk about that communication part, like, if we are processing 2 applications here, so what will actually happen when we are going to be making it interact over the network at that particular time? Here we are going to be performing some serialization, and if you will see, if we have a lot of metadata, since here we are going to be having a lot of metadata. So what will happen? This is actually going to become very heavy. And that is actually going to be making this entire serialization process super, super slow. Because now we are having a lot of data. So this entire process is actually going to become super slow. Now let's discuss what could be the another disadvantage. So here, if you will see, no matter what we are doing, every time we are performing some serialization and deserialization. So the overhead of serialization and deserialization, that is going to get added up. So we can say serialization and deserialization overhead. Correct? So when you talk about serialization, what we are going to be doing, we are going to be converting your data into XML. And in the deserialization, we are going to be converting your XML back in the usable data. So entire process, if you will see this one, this process is slow. And here we are also going to be making use of resources. So we can say this is slow, as well as here we are going to be using some resources. So resources intensive processes, correct? Because your XML is complex and it is going to be containing many tags. So this will take more time, more computing power, so that we can convert it into a usable format, and that can actually lead to slow performance. So when we are going to be having some large amount of data, this one is actually going to become super, super slow. What could be the next disadvantage for this? That is complexity and rigidity. So what actually like I mean by this? So if you talk about soap, so that is actually going to be involving some strict standards. And why strict? because if I want both of the application to interact, there we are going to be following some standards, and in order to sending some request or sending some message, so that actually needs to be there in certain format. So that has to have some format that needs to get transmitted, and that needs to get processed. So all of these things we are going to be seeing, for one thing we are actually taking care of these three things. Also here we are going to be having a rigid structure, like we cannot send it in XML. Like initially we can only do it in XML, but we cannot even send it directly, so we'll need to format it down in zeros and ones. So if you will see, we are actually making it quite rigid. We are actually adding a lot of complexity also here, and because of this rigid structure it will become difficult for the soap to modify or adapt to the changing needs. Also if you talk about soap, so it requires a lot of setup and configuration, which actually makes it harder for developers to quickly add some new feature or services. So that is how we can say the soap was actually coming up with a lot of problems, right? So as the developers started encountering the new challenges with SOAP, that it is heavy, it is complex, it is slow, it is rigid, they started searching for some better alternatives. Their goal was to find a solution that is going to be providing some greater flexibility, which can be even fast, which can be even simple, and that is not going to add a lot of burden to the developer. So they just started thinking of all of the they started thinking of all of the problems, and they started thinking of a solution which can address all of these problems. So in order to solve all these problems, REST came into the picture. So here your REST stands for your representational state transfer. So here what actually happened, when you talk about REST, here we are going to be we are going to be making use of different uh, it is previously we for the soap we only had one thing, that we if we want to have that communication we are going to be making use of XML. But with REST we actually came up with a lot of flexibility. When you talk about REST, it can actually use JSON as a file format, it can also use XML and other file formats. It can make use of anything. Now based upon our requirement we are going to be making use of all those things. So before jumping ahead, we will see we listed down whatever problems we had with soap. We need to see how REST solved all those problems. So let's discuss the first one, which is simplicity, correct? So what issue we had with the soap, that it is not simple, it is not flexible. So we are going to be discussing simplicity and flexibility. So when you talk about SOAP, so SOAP was built on XML, which is actually going to be making use of some metadata, not some, a lot of metadata. So that is how when you are going to be sending messages through SOAP, that is going to get heavy and it will become difficult to work with. On the other side, when you talk about REST, so that is actually going to be making use of JSON. So this JSON stands for your JavaScript object notation. So JavaScript notation. Okay. And this is lightweight, this is human readable, and it is easy to parse. So when you talk about JSON, so this one actually became a preferred format for data exchange, and that is all because it was providing a faster communication. At the same time, this was lightweight. Plus, if you talk about the format in which, the format which JSON follows, so that is very human readable, correct? At the same time, if you talk about JSON, So this is easy to parse, because if you will see here, we are not going to be making a use of a lot of metadata. So that is the reason the moment JSON was introduced, it quickly became popular. It quickly became the preferred format for data exchange, because people knew when we are going to be making use of JSON, it is going to be providing a faster and more efficient alternative to XML. Also, let's little bit talk about JSON as well. So your JSON, this actually stands for your JavaScript Object Notation. All right. So although like this name JSON, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Although this name actually has this JavaScript in this, but yeah, this is not like, this has nothing to do with the JavaScript. It, like, just in the full form we are going to be having it. Apart from that, it has nothing to do with JavaScript. Also, when you talk about JSON, so this is 100% language agnostic. Now, what do we actually mean by that? So it means when you talk about JSON, it can be used with virtually any programming language, not just JavaScript. So if you will be having any programming language, be it C Sharp, Java, Python, anything. So with all of these programming languages, you can make use of JSON. Here, if you will see this JSON word, this JSON full form, this has JavaScript object, uh, JavaScript there in its full form. So that naming confusion, like how this naming confusion actually came. So we had the person who created the JSON, the Douglas Crockford. So he was the developer of the popular JSON, and he was also the board member of JavaScript. So when he came up with the idea of coming up with JSON, he thought that it can mostly be used with JavaScript application, which is why it carries JavaScript in its name. Although when he created it, he had no vision like how we are going to be consuming it later. So that is the reason this full form is going to be having JavaScript in its name, but it's very important to note that it has nothing to do with the JavaScript. And if you talk about today, so JSON is the widely used format which we use to share data between the different applications. Also, it works with a lot of programming languages like your Java, Python, C Sharp, Ruby, and many others. Also, we'll be discussing one more important point, like how JSON is better than XAML. How JSON is better than XML. Okay. So when you talk about JSON, so it is very simplified. So when you talk about the format, JSON is going to be using, that is going to be of the format key value pair. So that is how we are going to be putting our data. So if you talk about this format, so this is quite compact as compared to XML, because here we are making use of key value pair so that we can represent our data. On the other side, when you talk about XML, so there we are going to be making use of a lot of metadata. We are going to be making use of a lot of tags so that we can organize our data, and that is what is going to make our entire data longer, complex, and hard to read. So this is what is making JSON more compact and straightforward. Yeah, so when you talk about JSON, here we are going to be having a key value pair structure. When you talk about a key value pair structure, so this is something which we have been using in other programming languages as well. So when you talk about JavaScript, so there we are going to be having something called as JavaScript objects, and there we are we are going to be providing some information in the form of some objects. Like similarly, when you talk about your Python. So there you are going to be having this key value pair structure, and that is what you are going to be calling it as dictionary. Similarly, when you talk about Java, so in Java, you are going to be having a key value pair, which you are going to be calling as map. Similarly, when you talk about C sharp, so there also you are going to be calling it as dictionary. So this key value pair structure is something which we have been using across different languages as well. Now I'll be just taking some example of some data, and I'll just firstly I'll just say like, okay, this is all data I am going to be having, and later we will see how we can format it out. Okay. So let us say I want to add some user information. So what and all user information I can be adding? Like let us say I am adding name. So for name, I am going to be making use of a string, correct? Now let us say I want to add age. So if I want to add age is a number, right? So for that we are going to be making use of a number only. Now let us say I want to add hobbies of this person. So when you talk about hobbies, a person can actually have more than one hobby as well. He can actually be like, having a hobby of something like dancing, singing, coding. So these could be the hobbies. Now if you will see, in order to input all the hobbies, I have actually taken the format of arrays, where I'm putting more than one information, right? Now, if I want to add address of this person, how I can do? I can actually go ahead and add, like, let us say I want to add some lane information. So I will write lane, and next to that, let us say I'm entering something like lane number. If I want to add city, I can add like city, and here I can go ahead and provide city name. If I want to add state, I can go ahead and provide state name here. So if you are going to be seeing what we have used for the address part, we are making use of nested JSON, because in order to enter the address, I'm actually making use of the same with the help of some another JSON only, right? Now I'll just quickly see, like, how it is actually differing, like, how we represent our data in XML as well as how we represent our data in JSON. So instead of writing down the entire, I'm just going to be taking a small snippet of that. Okay. So first let's see for the JSON, like, for the person, I am going to be entering name. So the name could be something like John. For the age, I can go ahead and add 30. Like it could be anything, okay? So you can see just this amount of data. Now, if I want to represent the same in XML, how I will be doing? I'm going to be firstly having an opening tag user. Inside user, I'm going to be having another tag for the name. And here I'm going to be adding John. Then I'll have closing tag for this name. After that, we are going to be having another tag for age, and there I'm going to be writing the value for age, then a closing tag of age. And after that, I am having a closing tag of user. So you can see for entering this amount of information, I am going to be making use of these many metadatas here. So if you will take the example of these two here on the screen, you can see JSON is much shorter and clearer. In JSON, we are not making use of any extra metadata. As you can see, JSON contains only the data. There are no extra tags or metadata. So the file is much lighter and easier to process. On the other side, if you will see XML, so that is heavily structured with a lot of opening and closing tags. which is going to be making it more complex and heavy. Plus, if you see JSON, since it is having a concrete amount of data only which is relevant, so it will be very easy for us to serialize and deserialize. Because, like, again, even if it is in JSON, we will have to perform serialize and deserialize on the top so that it can interact. So when you talk about JSON, so it is a simple structure. It means it is going to be more efficient. It, when you talk about working with a large amount of data, when you will be having a lot of requests and responses in that particular time, JSON is actually going to make the entire process more faster. All right. Here, if you will see, yeah. So here, if you are going to be seeing, I mentioned something like JSON is 100% language agnostic. So what do I mean by that? So when you talk about JSON, so this is compatible with all programming languages. So whether you are working with JavaScript, whether you are working with Python, whether you are working with Ruby or Java or any other programming language, you can easily use JSON. So most of our modern languages, they have built-in libraries for parsing JSON so that the entire process will become simple, and it will be easier for us to integrate it across all the different tech stacks available to us. So because of this, JSON is generally preferred for services that needs to communicate with each other. So even if it is going to be written in different programming languages, still, JSON is going to be the perfect format, because this is going to be bringing the flexibility, and because of that flexibility only, this is so widely used. When I took that example, this particular one. So in this example, if you will see, this is how generally we are going to be representing a JSON object. So in this example, you can see that JSON data structure is in the form of key value pair. This is our key, this is our value, this is our key, this is our value. So accordingly, I have structured everything. And all of those things are going to be inside your curly braces. So we are going to be having your keys, and all the keys, like be it your name, age, email, all of those are going to be strings. And when you talk about value, so it could be either in the form of number, strings, or any other data type. So this is pretty much similar to your JavaScript object or your Python dictionary. But if you will see, some little difference is there, right? Since this module is pretty much bigger in size, so I have broken it down into two different parts. In this particular one, we have discussed about your SOAP, and we have also discussed about your REST. In the next module, we are going to be covering what are the advantages of REST, and if we will have to write the REST APIs, how we can do that. So I'll be seeing you in the next module. Bye bye.